5 years after burying the man she loved, she sees him alive, sitting on a flight to Mexico. How is he there? Why did he fake his own death? And what will she do now? Get ready for a story filled with mystery, betrayal, and twists that will leave you breathless. Hey, where are you watching us from today? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories. The hum of the airplane engines provided a constant background noise, a lullaby to some, but a steady drumbeat to Emily Carter's frayed nerves. The scent of disinfectant mixed with the faint aroma of coffee brewing in the galley as she adjusted her navy blue uniform and tucked a loose strand of chestnut hair back into place. Her life as a flight attendant was a series of orchestrated routines, each flight a carefully rehearsed play. But tonight, as she prepared for takeoff on her route to Miami, something unsettled her, a strange, almost electric tension in the air. She surveyed the cabin, her practiced smile hiding the exhaustion of years spent running from the void left by her husband's death. 5 years had passed since Michael's supposed demise in the fire that destroyed their home and their future. Grief had consumed her like a wildfire, leaving her hollow and seeking solace in the sky, where the demands of her job masked the chaos within. It had taken everything to claw her way out of the financial ruin he had left behind, only to fall into the clutches of Richard Ramsey, a man whose name alone sent a chill down her spine. The passengers filed in one by one, dragging their luggage and settling into their assigned seats. Emily's eyes scanned them automatically, noting details as part of her training. She offered warm greetings, directed a child to their seat, and ensured a frail, elderly woman had her oxygen tank secured. Then, as she glanced at the last passenger boarding, her heart stopped. A man stepped into the cabin, his face partially obscured by the shadow of his baseball cap. But she didn't need to see his full face to know. Her heart recognized him before her mind could catch up. It was Michael. For a moment, Emily thought her mind was playing a cruel trick on her. She blinked, but he remained there, his movements so painfully familiar as he stowed his bag in the overhead compartment and settled into a seat near the window. Her legs felt rooted to the floor as waves of shock and disbelief crashed over her. How could he be here? How could he be alive? The questions spiraled through her mind, leaving her paralyzed in the aisle. The fastened seatbelt sign dinged overhead, pulling her back to the present. Her colleagues moved efficiently through the cabin, oblivious to the storm raging inside her. Emily forced herself to move, to plaster on the veneer of professionalism that her job demanded. She walked past him, careful not to let her gaze linger, but her thoughts were a cacophony. Was it really him? Or was this some cruel coincidence? A doppelganger sent to torment her? The flight took off smoothly, the city lights shrinking below them until they were swallowed by the night. Emily's hands trembled as she poured drinks and distributed snacks, the sight of Michael's profile in her peripheral vision like a ghost haunting her. The man who had left her to face the fallout of his debts, who had abandoned her to a life of threats and fear, was sitting just a few rows away. She couldn't escape the rising tide of anger and anguish that threatened to overwhelm her. When the passengers began to settle into their routines, reading, sleeping, or watching movies, Emily stood at the galley, gripping the counter for support. She couldn't ignore this, couldn't let him slip away again. Her mind raced with memories of the fire, of the weeks spent identifying what little remained of their life together. And now, here he was, alive and well, as if he had never been gone. The betrayal was a knife twisting in her chest. She decided then that she needed answers. But the confines of the plane left her no room for confrontation. Her opportunity would have to wait until they landed. For now, she would endure the torment of his presence, all the while pretending she hadn't noticed him. Emily returned to her duties, her smile strained, her every move shadowed by the knowledge that her carefully constructed life was on the brink of unraveling. As the plane soared through the darkness, so too did her thoughts, spiraling toward the inevitable collision course with the truth. Emily's hands trembled as she prepared a fresh pot of coffee in the galley, the hum of the engines her only solace. Michael's face, his unmistakable features, the slight crook of his nose, and the scar above his brow, was seared into her mind. She couldn't unsee it, and yet, the questions gnawed at her sanity. How could this man, Her husband, presumed dead and mourned for years, be sitting just a few rows away. Was he truly alive? Or was her grief playing cruel tricks on her, turning a stranger into a ghost of the past? She clung to the counter, memories flooding back in relentless waves. The fire had been a nightmare, one she had barely survived herself. She had rushed home that night to find their house engulfed in flames, firefighters pulling her back as she screamed Michael's name. The weeks that followed had been worse, sorting through ashes, facing condolences, and finally being handed a charred wedding band as proof of his death. She remembered collapsing onto the floor, the grief tearing through her like shards of glass. That pain had never left her. She had only buried it deep beneath the surface. Emily's eyes darted to the seat he occupied, but she forced herself to focus on her duties. The past 5 years had been a slow march through survival. Michael's debts had crushed her, leaving her vulnerable to men like Richard Ramsey, who took pleasure in exploiting her desperation. Her life had become a balancing act between paying off those debts and keeping herself afloat. And now, this man, this specter, had reappeared, threatening to undo everything. As the plane soared through the night, Emily's resolve hardened. She would confront him. If he truly was Michael, then he owed her answers. Her anger bubbled beneath the surface, threatening to spill over. She couldn't reconcile the man she had loved with the cruel act of leaving her to fend for herself. Yet a small, nagging part of her, the part that still yearned for closure, whispered that maybe there was more to the story. Maybe he had suffered too. The fasten seatbelt sign dinged again as turbulence rocked the cabin, mirroring the storm inside Emily. She steadied herself, her breathing shallow, and forced a smile for the passengers. She glanced at Michael again, catching a brief moment of his profile. He seemed tense, his gaze fixed on the window, his hands gripping the armrest. He hadn't noticed her yet, or at least he was pretending not to. Later, when the cabin lights dimmed and most of the passengers had dozed off, Emily found herself lingering near his row. Her pulse raced as she debated whether to approach him, to break the fragile barrier between them. But fear held her back. What if he denied it? What if he truly had abandoned her? The thought made her stomach churn. She decided to wait until they landed. She needed answers, but not here. Not in the confined space of the aircraft. The minutes dragged on, each one stretching into an eternity. Emily felt like a prisoner, trapped between her duties and the weight of her emotions. She longed for the flight to end, for the chance to finally confront the man who had haunted her dreams and her nightmares. As the plane began its descent, Emily's grip on the back of a seat tightened. The time for confrontation was near, and she wasn't sure if she was ready. The plane touched down smoothly, the lights of Miami's airport illuminating the runway. Emily's heart raced as she prepared for the passengers to disembark. She watched Michael from the corner of her eye, noting the way he adjusted his baseball cap and slung his bag over his shoulder. He moved with a purpose, as if eager to disappear into the crowd. But Emily was determined not to let him slip away. As the last passengers left the cabin, she followed him at a distance, her footsteps light but deliberate. The bustling terminal was a sea of noise and motion, but Emily's focus was razor-sharp. She saw him glance over his shoulder once, his eyes scanning the crowd. Did he recognize her? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She quickened her pace, weaving through the throngs of travelers until she was just a few steps behind him. "Michael," she said, her voice barely audible over the din. He stopped abruptly, his body stiffening. Slowly, he turned to face her, and the look of recognition in his eyes confirmed everything. Emily's breath hitched as their gazes locked. There was no mistaking it now. This was her husband, alive and standing before her. "Emily," he said, his voice low and filled with something she couldn't quite decipher. Guilt, perhaps, or regret. I didn't expect this." She felt a surge of anger rise within her, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "Didn't expect this?" she hissed. "Michael, you're supposed to be dead. Do you have any idea what you've put me through?" He glanced around nervously, as if searching for an escape route. "Can we talk somewhere private?" he asked, his tone pleading. "This isn't the place." Emily hesitated, her fury warring with her need for answers. Finally, She nodded and followed him to a quieter corner of the terminal. The tension between them was palpable, a fragile thread stretched to its breaking point. "Start talking," she demanded, her voice sharp. "I want to know everything." Michael exhaled heavily, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't die in that fire," he began. "I staged it. I had to. The debts, the threats, they were closing in on me. On us. I thought that if I disappeared, you'd be safe." "Safe?" Emily's voice rose incredulously. "You call what I've been through safe? I've spent the last 5 years paying off your debts, dodging threats from Richard Ramsey, and trying to rebuild my life. You abandoned me, Michael. You left me to clean up your mess." "I thought I was doing the right thing," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought you'd be better off without me." Emily's anger flared again, but it was tempered by the ache in her chest, the pain of years spent mourning him. She wanted to scream, to cry, to shake him until he understood the depth of her betrayal. But all she could do was stare at him, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. "I don't even know who you are anymore," she said finally, her voice trembling. "But I'm going to find out." Emily walked away from Michael, her heart pounding in her chest. The confrontation had left her shaken, but it had also ignited a spark within her, a determination to uncover the truth. She wasn't sure if she could ever forgive him, but she needed answers, and she wasn't going to stop until she got them. That night, as she lay in her hotel room, the events of the day replayed in her mind. Michael's words echoed in her ears, their weight pressing down on her. He had staged his own death to protect her, but at what cost? She thought about the life she had built without him, the strength she had found in the face of adversity. Could she trust him again? Or was he just another part of the chaos that had consumed her life? Emily's phone buzzed on the nightstand, breaking her train of thought. It was a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk." "It's about Michael." Her blood ran cold as she stared at the message. Who could it be? And what did they know about Michael? Her fingers hovered over the screen before she typed a response. "Who is this?" The reply came almost immediately. "Someone who knows the truth. Meet me tomorrow at 10 a.m., Café La Vista." Emily's heart raced as she read the message. The mystery surrounding Michael was deepening, and she was being pulled further into its grip. She had no choice but to follow the trail, even if it led her into danger. Morning sunlight filtered through the curtains of Emily's hotel room, but its warmth did little to chase away the unease clinging to her. The text she'd received the night before played on repeat in her mind as she prepared for the meeting. Whoever this anonymous messenger was, they claimed to know about Michael. That alone was enough to push her forward, despite the gnawing apprehension. By the time Emily arrived at Café La Vista, the bustling sounds of clinking cups and muted conversations filled the air. She scanned the room, her gaze landing on a man sitting at a corner table. He was in his 40s, sharply dressed, with a calm demeanor that seemed almost rehearsed. He gestured for her to join him, and she obeyed, her heels clicking against the tiled floor as she approached. "Emily Carter," he said, his voice smooth, almost practiced. "It's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Richard Ramsey." Her stomach twisted at the name, a jolt of adrenaline shooting through her veins. She recognized him instantly. This was the man who had terrorized her for years, the one she'd been forced to pay off after Michael's disappearance. Every instinct screamed for her to leave, but she stayed seated, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. "You have some nerve," she said, her tone icy. "What do you want?" Richard's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Straight to the point. "I like that. What I want, Emily, is simple. Michael owes me. And now that I know he's alive, it's time he pays up." Emily's heart pounded as she processed his words. "If you think I'm going to help you, you're out of your mind," she said, her voice firm. "I've already paid more than enough." Richard leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "You misunderstand. I'm not asking for your money. I'm offering you a way out, a chance to be free of this once and for all." "Michael's return changes everything." Her brows furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Help me find him, Emily. Bring him to me, and I'll wipe the slate clean. No more debts, no more threats. You'll be free." Emily stared at him, the weight of his offer sinking in. It was tempting, an end to the years of fear and financial strain. But the thought of betraying Michael, even after everything he'd done, made her stomach churn. Could she really trust Richard Ramsay to keep his word? "I need time to think," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard nodded, his expression softening just enough to unsettle her. "Take all the time you need," he said, standing and sliding a business card across the table. "But don't take too long. My patience isn't infinite." As he walked away, Emily sat frozen, the card burning a hole in her palm. She was caught in a web of lies and deceit, and every move she made seemed to pull her deeper into its grip. The only way out was forward, but the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty. Emily spent the rest of the day wrestling with her decision. Richard's offer was a lifeline, but it came with strings attached, strings that could strangle her if she wasn't careful. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his proposal than he was letting on. The only way to make sense of it all was to confront Michael again. That evening, she tracked him down to a modest motel on the outskirts of the city. The receptionist, a young woman with a bored expression, barely glanced at her before giving her Michael's room number. Emily's hand trembled as she knocked on the door, her breath hitching when it creaked open. Michael stood there, his face etched with exhaustion. "Emily," he said, his voice tinged with surprise. "What are you doing here?" She pushed past him, her resolve hardening. "We need to talk," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "And this time, you're going to tell me everything," Michael sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I told you already." "No," Emily interrupted, her voice sharp. "You told me part of the story. Now I want the whole truth. Why did you fake your death? And why is Richard Ramsay still after you?" He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. It wasn't just about the debts, he admitted finally. There were other people involved. Dangerous people. Richard was just the beginning. If they found out I was alive, they'd come after you too. That's why I disappeared. Emily's chest tightened as his words sank in. Other people? Who? What did you do, Michael? "I made a deal," he said, his voice barely audible. "It was supposed to be temporary, just enough to get us out of trouble, but it spiraled out of control. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. Faking my death was the only way to protect you." Emily stared at him, her emotions a swirling tempest of anger, fear, and disbelief. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she said, her voice trembling. "You've turned my life into a nightmare." "I know," he said, his expression filled with regret. "And I'm sorry, but I thought I was doing the right thing." His apology did little to soothe her. The weight of his choices pressed down on her like a suffocating blanket. She didn't know whether to scream, cry, or walk away. But one thing was clear. The answers she sought were only scratching the surface of a much larger mystery. Emily left Michael's motel room with a heavy heart, her mind racing with the implications of his confession. His decisions had shattered her life, and yet, she couldn't bring herself to turn her back on him completely. The tangled mess he'd left behind was as much her burden now as it was his. Back in her own room, she stared at Richard's card on the nightstand. His offer loomed large in her mind, the promise of freedom tantalizing but fraught with danger. She knew she couldn't trust him, but the alternative, continuing to live in fear, was equally unappealing. The next morning, Emily made her decision. She called Richard and arranged a meeting, her heart pounding as she spoke. If she was going to navigate this web of lies and deceit, she needed to take control of the situation. No more running, no more hiding. It was time to confront the darkness head-on. When she met Richard again, she laid out her terms. "I'll help you find Michael," she said, her voice steady. "But I want guarantees. No more threats, no more debts. When this is over, I walk away clean." Richard's expression was unreadable as he considered her words. Finally, he nodded. "You have my word," he said. "But remember, Emily, once you're in, there's no turning back." As she walked away from the meeting, Emily felt a strange mix of fear and determination. She was stepping into uncharted territory, a world of shadows and secrets where the stakes were higher than ever. But for the first time in years, She felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting back. The agreement with Richard weighed heavily on Emily's mind as she returned to her hotel. Every step forward felt like walking into quicksand, pulling her deeper into a world she wanted no part of. She had made her choice, but that didn't mean she trusted it or him. The question that haunted her now was how to proceed without sacrificing what little dignity and control she had left. Her phone buzzed again, the vibration breaking her thoughts. It was another text from Richard. "We've located him. Meet me tonight." The message was short, blunt, and left her stomach twisting in knots. Had he already begun tracking Michael? She stared at the screen for a long moment, her mind running through every possible scenario. What if this meeting wasn't about finding Michael, but about forcing her hand further into his schemes? That night, Emily arrived at the designated meeting spot, a dimly lit parking lot on the outskirts of Miami. The faint glow of a street lamp cast long shadows over Richard's sleek black car. He stood outside, waiting for her with a cigarette in hand, the ember glowing faintly in the dark. His smile was cold as she approached. "Emily," he greeted her, flicking the cigarette to the ground and crushing it under his heel. "You're punctual. I appreciate that." "Let's skip the pleasantries," she said, crossing her arms. "You said you found him. Where is he?" Richard nodded toward his car. "Get in. I'll explain on the way." Emily hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to turn and run. But she'd already come this far. Gritting her teeth, she climbed into the passenger seat, the leather interior cold against her skin. Richard slid in beside her, his expression unreadable as he started the engine. As the car sped through the city streets, Richard began to speak. "Michael's been spotted at a warehouse near the docks. It's one of his old haunts, where he used to meet certain associates." Emily's heart sank. "You mean the people he made those deals with?" "Exactly," Richard said, his tone almost casual. "Michael isn't just running from me, Emily. He's running from them. And if they find him before we do, let's just say things will get messy." Her pulse quickened as the gravity of the situation sank in. She had thought she was only dealing with Richard and his threats, but now it was clear the stakes were far higher. Michael's life, and possibly her own, hung in the balance. When they arrived at the warehouse, Richard parked a safe distance away, his gaze scanning the area. "Stay here," he ordered, opening the car door. "I'll handle this." Emily grabbed his arm before he could leave. "No, I'm coming with you." He raised an eyebrow but didn't argue, seemingly amused by her determination. Together, they approached the warehouse, the sound of waves crashing against the nearby docks filling the tense silence. The air was heavy with the scent of salt and rust, and the faint glow of a single light bulb illuminated the entrance. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Michael was there, as Richard had said, pacing nervously near a stack of crates. But he wasn't alone. Two men stood nearby, their sharp suits and cold expressions marking them as the kind of associates Michael had warned her about. Emily's heart pounded as she realized the danger they were all in. Richard stepped forward, his presence commanding. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice smooth and confident, "I believe we have some business to discuss." The two men exchanged glances before one of them spoke. "This doesn't concern you, Ramsey. Walk away." Emily watched as Richard's demeanor shifted, his smile turning razor-sharp. "Oh, but it does concern me," he said. "Michael owes me, and I intend to collect." The tension in the room escalated as the men squared off. Emily's gaze darted to Michael, who looked pale and shaken but otherwise unharmed. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, everything else faded away. She wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, but there was no time. "Emily," Michael said suddenly, his voice breaking the standoff. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," she shot back, her voice trembling. "Do you have any idea what you've dragged me into?" Before he could respond, one of the suited men stepped forward, his hand resting on the gun holstered at his side. "Enough," he barked. "This ends now." The room erupted into chaos as the man's words hung in the air. Emily felt her breath catch as Richard raised a hand in a calming gesture, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Let's not do anything rash," he said smoothly. We're all reasonable people here. But the other man wasn't buying it. His gaze was fixed on Michael, his expression dark. You've been playing both sides for too long, Carter. It's time to pay the price. Emily's heart raced as she realized what was happening. Michael's deals had placed him in a precarious position, caught between competing forces. And now, it seemed, the reckoning had finally come. Michael held up his hands in a placating gesture. I can explain. Don't bother, the man snapped. We're done with your excuses. The tension reached a breaking point as the man reached for his gun. Emily's instincts took over, and before she knew it, she had stepped in front of Michael, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender. Wait, she cried, her voice shaking. This doesn't have to end like this. The man hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he assessed her. Who the hell are you? Someone who's been dragged into this mess just like you, she said, forcing her voice to steady. But killing him won't solve anything. If you want your money, let us work something out. Richard stepped forward, a sly smile on his face. She's right, he said. Michael might be a fool, but he's a resourceful one. Give him time, and he'll make good on his debts. Emily shot him a sharp look, but he ignored her, his focus on diffusing the situation. The man with the gun seemed to consider this, his hand hovering over his weapon for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he lowered it, his expression hard. You have 1 week, he said, his voice cold. If he doesn't deliver, there won't be a second chance. With that, the men turned and left, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The tension in the room lingered even after they were gone, a suffocating weight that pressed down on Emily's chest. Michael sank to the floor, his head in his hands. I'm sorry, he muttered, his voice filled with anguish. I never wanted any of this. Emily stared at him, her emotions a tangled mess. She wanted to yell at him, to shake him, to demand answers. But all she could do was collapse into a nearby chair, her mind racing. The truth was out now. Michael's secrets, Richard's machinations, and the dangerous world they had been thrust into. And as much as she wanted to walk away, she knew she couldn't. Not yet, because buried within the chaos was something she couldn't ignore. The faint hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way out of this together. The days following the warehouse standoff were a blur of tension and preparation. Emily's mind raced with 1,000 questions, but no clear answers came. Michael remained in hiding at a rundown motel, avoiding the 2 suited men who had threatened his life. Emily stayed in close contact with Richard, though every conversation with him felt like a test of her resolve. She couldn't trust him, but she couldn't afford to alienate him either. The morning sun broke through the thin motel curtains as Emily sat at the small table in Michael's room, sorting through scattered papers and notes. Michael slouched on the edge of the bed, his face pale and drawn. His guilt hung heavy in the air, a weight neither of them could ignore. We have 1 week, Emily said, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but the strain in her eyes betrayed her growing exhaustion. That's not much time to figure out how you're going to pay them back. Michael nodded, but said nothing. His hands were clasped tightly in front of him, the knuckles white. Finally, he spoke, his voice hoarse. I have an idea. There's a property, one I kept off the books when I was alive. It's not much, but it might be enough to satisfy them. Emily frowned. Why didn't you tell me about this before? I didn't think I'd need it, Michael admitted, running a hand through his hair. It's risky, Emily. If they find out about it before we make the deal, they'll take it all and still demand more. Emily leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. So, what's your plan? Hope they take your word for it. No, he said, his voice firm. I'll go to Richard. He has connections, power. He can broker the deal and ensure the others back off. Emily's stomach churned at the thought of trusting Richard Ramsey with anything, let alone Michael's safety. Richard's not going to help you out of the goodness of his heart, she said. He's only in this for himself. I know, Michael said, meeting her gaze. But he's my best shot. Emily sighed, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She hated this, hated being dragged back into Michael's mess, hated the idea of relying on a man like Richard Ramsey. But she also couldn't walk away, not now. Despite everything, She still felt a flicker of loyalty to the man Michael had once been, the man she'd loved. "Fine," she said finally. "But I'm coming with you." Michael hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." The meeting was arranged for a secluded estate on the outskirts of the city. Richard had insisted on a neutral location, far from the prying eyes of his rivals. Emily and Michael arrived together, tension crackling between them. The property was surrounded by tall iron gates, and a long driveway led to a sprawling mansion that loomed like a fortress. As they stepped out of the car, Richard emerged from the shadows, flanked by two of his own men. He looked as sharp and calculating as ever, his suit immaculate and his expression unreadable. "Emily, Michael." He greeted them with a faint smirk. "I'm glad you decided to cooperate." Emily didn't respond, her jaw tight as she followed him inside. The mansion's interior was just as imposing as its exterior, with high ceilings, ornate chandeliers, and the faint scent of cigar smoke lingering in the air. Richard led them to a private study, where he gestured for them to sit. "Let's get down to business," Richard said, leaning back in his chair. "Michael, you mentioned a property." Michael nodded, pulling a folder from his bag and sliding it across the table. "It's a small piece of land, undeveloped, but valuable. It should be enough to settle my debts." Richard opened the folder and studied its contents, his expression unreadable. After a long moment, he nodded. "It's a start," he said, "but it's not enough to clear your slate completely." Michael's jaw tightened. "It's all I have." Richard leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "Then you'll need to sweeten the deal. I want you to sign over full rights to the property. No contingencies, no loopholes." Emily's stomach dropped. "That's not fair," she said, her voice rising. "You said—" "I said I'd help," Richard interrupted, his tone icy. "And I am. But this is the price. Take it or leave it." Michael glanced at Emily, his expression conflicted. She could see the hesitation in his eyes, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Finally, he nodded. "Fine," he said. "I'll sign." As Michael signed the papers, Emily's heart sank. She hated seeing him cornered like this, but she also knew they had no other choice. When it was done, Richard stood, his smile cold and triumphant. "Pleasure doing business with you," he said, sliding the papers into his briefcase. "You'll hear from me soon." As he left, Emily and Michael sat in silence, the enormity of what they'd just done settling over them like a heavy fog. The deal was done, but the tension lingered. They both knew this wasn't over. Days later, Emily stood on the balcony of her Miami hotel room, staring out at the ocean. The sun was setting, casting the water in shades of gold and crimson. It was beautiful, but the turmoil inside her made it hard to appreciate. The deal with Richard had bought them time, but it hadn't solved everything. Michael's debts were still a shadow hanging over them, and Richard's promises were as slippery as his smile. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. When she opened it, she found Michael standing there, looking more at peace than she'd seen him in years. He held an envelope in his hand, which he extended to her. "What's this?" she asked, frowning. "Richard came through," Michael said. "He sent me this. It's a partial repayment for the debts you've covered over the years. It's not much, but it's something." Emily stared at the envelope, her emotions warring within her. She didn't know whether to feel relieved or suspicious, but as she opened it and saw the check inside, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they were finally on the path to something better. Later that evening, as the city lights twinkled in the distance, Emily made a decision. She wasn't going to let Michael's mistakes define her life anymore. She would take the money, rebuild what she could, and move forward. Whether Michael would be part of that future remained uncertain, but for the first time in years, Emily felt free. The past had left its scars, but it had also taught her strength. And as she looked out at the horizon, she realized that the future was hers to shape, one step, one choice at a time. Thank you for listening until the end. What did you think of this story? If you can, leave your feedback in the comments. It helps me improve and motivates me to keep sharing stories. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and activate the notification bell. I'm sure the next video that pops up on your screen will also touch your heart. A big kiss, and see you in the next story.